Being Memorial Day, and I thought that might be one of the subjects we can look at a greater range than just as far as our nation is concerned, but that God is a God of memorials also. But we will look and see many times in the Bible, we won't go through all of them today, but many times the different memorials that God has left for one reason and one reason only, and that's for what? No, to remember. How many of you have problems remembering? How many of you are lying right now? Or how many of you forgot that you have a problem remembering? There was a gentleman that went to a science convention, and they had a memory expert that was going to speak there, but he didn't show up. And they were concerned that he had gotten an accident or something. And finally, later on, they got a hold of him, and they asked him why he didn't come, and the memory expert said, I forgot. There were three, I could tell you these stories all day long, we'll just hold to one or two here. But there were three only sisters who lived together, and it was evening, and one of them decided that she was going to take a bath, so she drew the bath, she was ready, and she put one foot in the water, and she stopped, and she yelled out, was I getting into the water or was I getting out? Well, one of the sisters responded, said, I don't know, I'll come up and see. So she gets to about the third step and she stops and she says, was I going up or was I coming down? The third sister said, I don't know. She said, I'm so glad that I'm not as forgetful as you two are, knock on wood. And she said, I'll be up to help you as soon as I see who's at the door. People forget, don't we? Okay? I can tell you that when I get out of bed in the morning, the first thing I see is a whiteboard. And on that whiteboard, I have written down certain things that I need to remember that I'm supposed, if there's a wedding like coming up this weekend, I'll have it down there. I'll make sure that I don't plan something else or tell somebody I'll be somewhere else in the midst of conflicting schedules. So we have a problem with that. So we need things to help jog our memories. I would guess that's what Memorial Day is all about. Okay? It's in the bulletin. Was it Abraham Lincoln that first kind of instituted this? It started with a lady putting flowers on her grave of her father, I believe, and it just kind of exploded to a point of remembering, because it is so important that we remember. If we in our own lives would mention or names or places that you see a picture of, it causes what? Memories. Okay? That we think, oh, what about, you remember when this happened or that happened, and all those types of things. The last Thursday I had the opportunity there was a young man that I've known, become friends with, that wanted to talk with me for a little while, and ended up in Rossville, my hometown. And it's always kind of interesting going back to Rossville and go by my mom and dad's grave that is there. I've been there for a while. And I go by the school where I went to school at. I still can drive by the house where I was raised. I can't believe the people that live there now had the audacity to change that house. But anyway, I thought about stopping and just jumping all over them about, you need to take this back 30 years where it was. You can't change it. But have you ever sat around and found some pictures and you look and say, boy, do you remember? Do you remember? Has anybody got any particular things that you would want to share, that pictures that I found some pictures of me being a senior in high school in the basketball team, which I am not going to show you. Okay? They bring back a lot of memories. We had a very good basketball team and a lot of good memories there and different things like that. How about you? What are some of the memories that you would bring back to your mind, pleasant memories, when you see a picture or anything particular?
Our children's baby pictures.
Children baby pictures, okay, absolutely. Okay. Rich just turned 40 in April. And I can still remember the day we brought him home from the hospital. You think, wow, it's amazing how Rich gets older and I don't. It's just really, okay. Baby pictures. How about anybody else? Yes.
Jim's long hair.
Oh, I remember that. Move right along, right, Jim? We'll just move right along, okay? Anybody?
Summer vacations.
Summer vacations, a lot of pictures that we take, they bring back those memories. And memory is a very great thing that God has given us, yes.
Picture of California and Tennessee.
California and Tennessee? Okay, yeah, okay. Probably had some fun there, didn't you?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. That means yes. Yep, okay. Anybody else? Yes, Diane. Okay, okay. Loved ones that have passed on. I thought you were going to say something about Merle with hair or something like that. I didn't know. Can't get away from him, can you, Merle? It hasn't. Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
Pictures from Indiana Beach.
Indiana Beach? Okay, okay. Very good. So we all, whether young or old, we have these memories that are spurred by certain pictures or certain things. You know, when my father passed away, there are certain items that I took that I still have. One was an ice hook, Dad was an iceman, and all those memories that we have that are stirred by physical objects, whether they're pictures, whether they're items, whatever they might be, that when we see them, our mind goes back to these pleasant experiences that we have had. Well, God is the same way. See, we have memories of those things that we put value upon. We have memories of those things that are important to us, and we have those things that will spur that memory because we want those memories to remain. I think it's so important, and I don't want to get too far off base here, that we as a church, when we can, celebrate the patriotic days, the national holidays, the important days. That's one of the concerns I have, folks, that in many cases, maybe not here in Watsika, but in many cases our young children are not being taught those things. Okay? I've shared this with some of you in a recent history book that will be used. It's out of Texas, where most public school books are coming out of Texas now, is that in the history part, they do not have Paul Revere's name mentioned anywhere. But Oprah Winfrey's in there. Okay? And see, what the attempt is here, and just so you know where I'm coming from, the attempt is to remove from our history the religious foundations on which this country was founded. That's the attempt. And if our children are not taught those things, then there will be no recollection of those things. Therefore, a great part of our heritage is lost because our kids are not being taught that. We're going to get into that here in just a few moments. Memorials play a very important role in biblical history too. Okay? That we're going to look at a quick history of the Old Testament here of the Jewish people, of the Israelite people, and some of the things that's going to lead up to Joshua chapter 4 here. So let's begin very quickly here. We start here with Moses, and guys, we need to sit down or do something. Thank you very much. That Moses has this vision of this burning bush, or the bush that was not burning, and what was the result of that? God called Moses to do what? Okay, to bring the Israelite nation out of Egypt. They had been there for a long, long time. And they have these plagues that God would work upon the people of Egypt, those unbelievers, because of their rejection of God. And one of the things that we would learn as we study Exodus, that every one of those plagues that God worked through Moses was against an Egyptian god, showing Moses and God's superiority. So the last one was called what? The death of firstborn. Okay? The death of the firstborn. But there was one way that could be escaped, and that was if they would take this lamb and kill, sacrifice the lamb, and do what? Spread the blood on the doorpost. And then what would happen then is that destroying angel would pass over. Okay? And the oldest firstborn in each household would be saved. In the midst of this, God sets up this very important feast. There were 3 of them basically, but he sets up this feast of the Passover. And it was demonstrated in the fact of the unleavened bread, And this meal that they would have, this Passover meal is where Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. That's what they are observing at that time as Jesus' life comes to an end. Okay? So, Moses, when they thought they were trapped, God separates the Red Sea, parts the Red Sea. The Israelite nation is saved. And they travel to Mount Sinai to receive the law. And then they begin their journey to where? Promised land. Okay? So they get up to the Promised Land, and they send the spies out. And 10 of the spies come back and say, there's no way in the world we can't do it. Joshua and Caleb, 2 of the spies, says, yes, God's given us the land. Let's take it. Let's take it. But then we read in the book of Numbers that the people rebel. They refuse to go in there. And God says what? Okay. 40 years. Okay. And any of you 18 years or older are not going to live to see that. So they all die off. Now, understanding what's going on here, folks, that 40 years later, it comes time now that Joshua is going to lead the children of Israel into that promised land. The people that are living there now, outside of Joshua and Caleb, they don't know about Egypt and the plagues unless the adults told them. That's part of the message here. But they don't know where their heritage is at. They don't understand what's going on here at all. So after 40 years of going around in the wilderness, and that's an unbelievable, you realize that maybe 1.5 million people are going to die out there in the desert during that 40-year period because of the rejection of God. But finally it comes time. And Joshua's going to lead the people into Israel. They go up to the river Jordan, and that is seen in chapter 3 of the book of Joshua, and it's flooded. There's no way they can get across. And God says, you take the Ark of the Covenant, put it in front of you, and as soon as the priest's feet touch that water, it's separated. And then they passed through the Jordan River onto the other side. But wait. See, in the midst of this, something so important has happened here that God says, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go back out into the Jordan River, that area that has been separated, and you're going to get 12 stones, one for each tribe. And then you're going to bring that, and you're going to make some kind of monument here for the people to see. And they will ask the question, what are these stones for? And that will give them the opportunity to share with them, to share with what is going on as far as the Israelite nation is concerned. Now, there is a passage in Deuteronomy chapter 6, I believe it is, and another one in Deuteronomy chapter 27, that it appears, if we're talking about the same stones, that I believe we are, but on those stones was engraved the 10 Commandments. That when they made this monument, the law was going to be there, and it's going to be there for people to see, for them to ask the question, what are these stones for? What do they mean? And that will give them the opportunity in order to share with them the history of their nation and basically how God has dealt with us, how He has helped us through, how He has delivered us in many, many ways. And what is the reality of the situation here is that these people, Israelites and us, are not really that different. If we don't have something to remind us, we're going to forget. Now, one of the things that God has left to remind us is the church. That is a marker, a spiritual marker for the world around us, that God has dealt with us in His church. But for us especially, He has left this communion table for us as a reminder of how He has delivered us, how He has freed us, how He has been with us through all of this. So when we look at these stones that are by the River Jordan, what do they mean to the Israelites? We want to draw the comparison to us and this table that is before us. The first thing, what do these stones mean, is it's a time of remembrance and reflection. These people had not experienced all that had gone on. For the most part, those people have died. Moses is dead. Joshua and Caleb are the only two left here that have come out and understood what this really meant. And we will see later, I forget what chapter it is later in Joshua, that Joshua has his own personal stone that he sets out as a memorial for his faith. And each one of us ought to have that also. But it's a time of remembrance. God knows how we think. He instructs us to build a memorial. He wants us to have something in front of us. God has always used material things to teach spiritual truths. He has always used something that we could see, because we are physical people, in order to do that. And we need to take the time to remember what God has done. We don't do that sometimes. We're so busy in life. Every one of us, I believe that if we would think long enough, that we would look at times in our lives where it was God that delivered us through whatever we were going through. That we could talk for a long time. But sometimes we need to remember that. Somebody needs to jog our memory to what happened with that, what this is all about. These memorial stones are reminders of personal experiences that we've had. Our relationship with God being something that is private with us, that's what this is all about. There are milestones to reflect a certain point in our life, a stage in our life that we have experienced, and God has been there. And we need to remember and reflect upon this, these invaluable lessons of faith that we have experienced, to be remembered. They need to be remembered so we don't lose the ground where we're really at. Those stones, this table, they're a reminder that God has been active in our lives, that God is active in our lives, that He is working in our lives, and this is a time for us to draw closer to them. The progress that we have made in our life, that we need to reflect upon God. We're a nation that doesn't do that. I would suppose for the most part we are a people that are afraid to honestly look at ourselves because we don't like what we see. We don't like what we think. But in the midst of that, it's a time for us to reflect upon God's grace and His mercy, that He is here to help us and to see us through those times. This table is a reminder that God has been active, that it's a time that He is active in His people. And we need to recall those times when God worked in our lives. And that's a time that we need to take inventory. We need to look at our hearts and to see where we are as far as a nation's concerned, as far as our Christian faith is concerned. So it's a time to remember. It's a time to reflect, not just quickly take the bread and the grape juice and go on about our business, but a time to stop and seriously think about who are we. You know, there's a guy that was telling me one time as he was growing up in high school age, that every time he went out with his friends, the last thing his mom would yell to him is, "Remember who you are." Okay? Reminding him of the standard that he was supposed to live by, reminding of the right and wrong. And there's times that we need to remember who we are. That we are part of God's family. We are His children. We need to reflect and think upon those things, because Satan wants us to think that we are worthless. He wants us to think that God would have nothing to do with us. So we need to stop and remember, oh, you're a liar, Satan. God does love us. He has His grace and mercy. But we need to take the time to look at that. The second thing is renewal and response. A reminder that God keeps His word. God keeps His word. The crossing of the Jordan was the movement from an old life to a new life. What have they been doing for the last 40 years? Wandering. Okay? Were they part of God's people at that time? And the answer is no, they weren't. Okay, you'll see that in chapter 5 of the book of Joshua. So this is the new start for them. Okay? That everything that God had against these people of Israel, their rejection of Him, is going to be taken away. And in verse 9, it's a personal act by Joshua. You know, the leaders have to take the lead here. I don't like Ted Turner at all. I don't like what he stands for. But he has a sign on his desk that says, "Lead, follow, or get out of the way." And if we're going to be spiritual leaders, that we need to take the lead, that we have to commit ourselves before, you know, it's in any business, including the church, that a congregation will never rise above its leaders. And it will never go beyond where its leaders are. It's true of the church, it's true of business, it's true of our nation. I, for one, feel very, very safe and confident that Eric Holder, the Attorney General, is investigating himself to see if he did anything wrong. And I'm sure he's going to find out that he didn't. But it is true, we're never going to rise above our leadership. So it's Joshua in verse 9 that, look in verse 9 of chapter 4, Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priest who carried the Ark of the Covenant stood, and they are there to this day. They are a memorial to what happened there, that God delivered his people, that God separated the waters of the Jordan, that they crossed over into this new land now, that they are going to be reestablished, not by their own strength, but by God's strength. That is the key to this. 40 years of defeat and failure. Now there's a new beginning. And that's what that memorial is all about. A memorial just doesn't look back to the past, it also goes into the future that we can look. Exactly 40 years from the time they left Egypt, the exact day is when they crossed the Jordan River. You can read it. It was the 10th day of the first month. To the day, those 40 years of wandering are over. And they will go to a town called Gilgal. That's in chapter 5. And the meaning of the word Gilgal is the reproach has been rolled back. That they are now reestablishing their relationship with God. And that's going to happen in chapter 5 we won't go into right now. But behind them was this memorial. And now there is a new sense of purpose for them. This nation is going forward now after all of this, and those stones are a reminder. That is what this table is a reminder of us also. That there is a new sense of purpose now. That we are under this new covenant that we'll talk about here in just a few moments. There was a man that was saved many years ago. He grew up in a small little country town, a small little country church. And he remembered the great times that he had there, but he moved away. And like a lot of people, he got busy with life. And all at once, he wasn't where he used to be with God. He didn't have the joy and the peace that he had at one time. So there was a family reunion that came up that year, and he traveled back home. And one of the places he went was to that little church. And he remembered as he stood in the middle of that church, all those things that happened in his younger years, and all the fun that he had, and all the enjoyment, the enthusiasm he had for God at that time. And he stand in the middle of the church, and he just looked up, and he said to God, "Rekindle my fire, Lord. Rekindle my fire, Lord. Do it again." That's what this is all about. That's what a memorial is all about, to bring us back to a point that we look to God and want to regain maybe what we have lost. That part of our heritage as a nation is for these holidays to regain what maybe we have lost. And it's so important that we renew our faith. It's so important that we respond to what God has set before us. The third thing is reverence and repetition. Here's this monument, it's 12 stones. Here's this table, it is bread and grape juice. It's a reminder of God's faithfulness. It's a reminder of how God has worked and how He is working. And each time these people saw that, they were reminded. They connected the stone with the covenant. That we can recall God's deliverance. It gives us encouragement and strength. And this is calling us back to the covenant. God has always acted with people through a covenant. Whether it was Adam and Eve in the very beginning, whether it was Abraham, whether it was Moses, whether it was the children of Israel, whether it was the Christians or not, He's always dealt with people with this covenant. Some kind of, I don't want to say agreement, but far more than that, some kind of promise, one to another, that this was going to last, to bring us back to our priorities. One of the things that Joshua says to these people is that these stones are here so that you might always fear the Lord. That you'll remember who He is and what He is and what He has accomplished in your life. That we are responsible to remember who we are. But we also have the responsibility, we also have the privilege to tell people of God's presence. To tell people of God's life. The memorial stones were a signpost to the world. This church, this table, is a signpost to the world. And we need to be busy when our children would ask, what does that stone mean? They were to answer them. You read in the book of Deuteronomy, the second giving of the law, before they went into the promised land, Moses speaks to the people how many times? He says, tell your children, speak to them about this in the morning and in the night and as you're walking down the street, that we need to be very busy telling them about what this is really all about. How important it is that we can share our faith. You know, that's when we talked about the Passover meal. That was one of the beginnings of the Passover meal. When all this would set out and the youngest person in the home would go up to the oldest person in the home and say, what is this meal all about? And then they would recount that. And they would tell. And we need to be doing that with our children. Sitting down, not just our physical children, but our church children. That we need to be telling them about what this is really all about. When they ask, what is this table for? How many of us could tell them? How many of us will tell them so that they might know what is really going on as far as this covenant that we have with God? Memorials are not only for us, they are for those who follow us. They are for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, because who is going to tell them if we don't? Our schools? Our government? I don't think so. I don't think so. So how important it is for us to share with those around us the responsibility to teach our children about the faithfulness of God. I remember one day Joe and I was talking to, he said, well, Joe, I'm not going to force my children to believe in anything. I'm just going to let them grow up and they can make their own choices. I said, well, then you don't have a family doctor then. Because you're not going to make them go to the doctor, are you? You're going to just wait and let them make that decision on themselves. Oh, you're a dentist? Or going to school? What? So, and he just looked at me. See, folks, and it's not Father's Day, but I will share this with you then too, probably. I am convinced beyond doubt that I will stand before God one day and answer to Him for how I taught my 3 sons. Period. Period. Not moms, dads. That is our responsibility. And it is the church's responsibility to know that the youth that are here know what we're doing here, what this is all about, to teach them about the faith. Somebody taught us at some point, didn't they? Okay? How important it is. It is Paul that tells Timothy, teach young men that they may teach others also. That it's the church is only a generation away from extinction. And we must be committed to the fact that we're going to continue to tell these children what the truth is, because they're not finding it too many places other than here. We can compare Israel's journey to life's journey. When we look into the Lord's Supper, we say, what does this mean? What does this really mean? Memorials are recalling the journey. They are remembering the Lord. They are establishing these spiritual markers for us. They are helping us align our compass. Are we in the right direction? If we are not communing with God, if we don't do it here at this table, I don't know where we're going to do it or when we're going to do it. What is the meaning of this bread? What is the meaning of this grape juice? Why are we doing what we're doing? That we need to take that to heart and also share with those that are around us. There was a certain Persian king that he grew up in a poverty-stricken society. He was very, very poor, but he had this rags to riches story that somehow he was raised to the glory of the royal throne. And one of the first things that he did when he became king is he sent some of his men back to that little shack where he grew up to get some of his toys, to get the cracked bowl that he ate in and the old chair that he sat in. And he brought him to a room in the palace. And every day he sat there in that room for a half hour looking at those things. And when his workers, his servants came to him and said, why are you doing this? Lest I forget from whence I came. That is the idea of this table, one of the aspects of this table, that we don't forget who we are. we don't forget where we came from, that we are wicked, sinful sinners, that God has given His grace and mercy to us and saved us. So we have these memorials that we share in so that we don't forget, that we won't forget. What are these stones for? What is this table for? What does this mean? Let's pray. Father, as we bow before you just now, we ask the question, Father, what does this table mean in front of us? That if we simply come to just take of this bread and this grape juice to go on with our life without remembering, without reflecting, without renewing our commitment to you, Father, without responding and without worshiping you, then I pray that we don't take it, that we just stay away. That this represents the very death of your Son. This represents the very salvation that we enjoy. And I pray that, especially on a day that we are celebrating memorials, that we take a lot of time, God, to think about what we're about to do. That we might have a humble heart, a holy heart, as we come before you to take of this bread and this cup. I pray in Jesus' name.